And welcome. Good to see you all here at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I hope we're not going to depress you too much and that there will be some... Gaia has some uplifting ideas as well. My name's Kirsty Lang. I'm a British journalist based here in Vienna. It's great to be here at the Humanities Festival. In the next hour, we are going to discuss two of the biggest issues facing the human race at the moment: climate change and migration. My guest is GAIA VINCE. She's a science writer from London and a research fellow at University College London. Her book, Nomad Century, begins with the words, and I've got it here, and it is available outside, and she will be signing in English and in German, and it begins with the words, "A great upheaval is coming. It will change us, and it will change our planet." But it is not all doom and gloom. Gaia has some solutions about how we can manage this upheaval as the human race if we collaborate with each other, and this is one of the things we're going to discuss. So it is very topical, this subject at the moment, particularly the issue of migration, immigration, which is dominating so many elections across Europe and, of course, across the globe. I mean, it was a big issue in the South African elections recently as well. So it's migration is happening everywhere, not just into Europe and the United States. Now, Gaia, you argue that given the pace of global warming, large swathes of the globe could become uninhabitable if we don't stop this warming in time, and this will drive massive migration, mainly from the south to the north, where it's cooler. We are already seeing climate migrants now, aren't we?
Yeah. Guten Morgen, and apologies for not speaking in Deutsch. It's lovely to be in Vienna. So yes, we're already starting to see unlivable conditions. You know, it's 2024. We've just had floods across Central Europe, all the way, you know, from Emilia-Romagna to the Czech Republic to Poland, which have killed people very sadly, but they've also made their homes unlivable, right? And so it's not something that is unique to parts of the world. There are seats at the front. We won't bite. Kirsty bites sometimes, but she's had breakfast, so she's not gonna do it. So, but yes, you know, if you look at the globe and if you look at how it's heating, that tropical band is becoming hotter and hotter, and we're already seeing temperatures above 50 degrees regularly for parts of the year now, and that really is unlivable.
As human beings, we can't really exist above 50 degrees, can we? I mean, that kills us.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And what you get is so we are seeing deaths. If you look just at Europe, last year there were an estimated above 60,000 excess deaths due to heat alone, and that's Europe. So we're seeing much hotter temperatures, and when heat is combined with humidity, that's when it becomes particularly deadly, because you know, we're mammals, we have to maintain a certain body temperature in order to survive, and we do that through evaporative cooling, through sweating, and as our sweat evaporates, it cools our body. But of course, the more moisture there is in the air, the less able we are to sweat. And so there is this thing called the threshold of survivability, and that is when the wet bulb temperature becomes so hot that even a young, fit person who is not doing any exercise will die within 6 hours. Now, it was thought that that threshold of survivability had not been exceeded anywhere on Earth, within you know, the time of humans having been on the planet. But you know, within the last 5 years, it was exceeded first of all in Oman, and now it's been exceeded several times across the planet. And that was set at 35 degrees of a wet bulb temperature. But now recent research carried out 2 years ago and then repeated by Australian researchers has actually put that wet bulb temperature considerably lower, somewhere between 25 and 28 degrees.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about how our cities can adapt, but you've mentioned Oman. I mean, all across the Middle East, there are vast cities being built as we speak. Why shouldn't people just live in air-conditioned spaces? I mean, you know, in Qatar they even air-condition outside, don't they? So, I mean, it is possible. We can live like that. I mean, Saudi Arabia is building a whole new city. We can adapt, can't we?
Yeah, and we can adapt incredibly. You know, we are a tropical ape that came from Africa, and we now live everywhere. We live in the Arctic, we live in deserts, we live in outer space. We can live, you know, we are incredibly adaptable, and that's fantastic. But that's in small, wealthy populations when we're talking about the Middle East, largely. Small, wealthy populations. If you look at, you know, we're 8 billion people now. If you look at some of the biggest cities, if you look at Mumbai, its population is somewhere above 50 million people, depending on how you count it, and at least 9 million of those live in slum housing. And this is, you know, small concrete boxes with corrugated iron roofs. They are already living, you know, in a place where they're getting inundated regularly from storm surges, and that doesn't just sweep in, you know, and destroy they have lack of sewerage there and all sorts of you know, health hazards. But it's also ingressing underneath, so it's changing the salinity of the soil, so it makes agriculture impossible. It makes diseases much more likely. So, you know, when we're talking about populations as we live now, our human world, which is these large city populations with all of our infrastructure, our energy systems, our agricultural systems, food, financial systems, all of that are interconnected and globalized and based on a background climate. You know, when you have these extreme conditions, you cannot air condition every slum house in Mumbai.
But right? There are things, I mean, like in Vienna, for instance, we've seen the planting of lots of trees recently and so on. I mean, there are things that we can do and we are doing in our cities.
Absolutely, and we must do them, right? Everywhere we'll have to adapt. We're living in the post-climate change world now, and people don't understand that, I think, and that's due to a lack of honesty, I think, from our leaders. You know, we hear this these very vague kind of descriptions of what might happen if we don't adapt to climate change. Climate change is here. It has been here for some time. We see the evidence outside. We feel it. We need honesty. You know, what will Vienna look like in 2030, in 2040, in 2060? What will the temperature be? How much precipitation will we get? Is it going to be the drizzle that we had in the 20th century? Or will it be these much heavier you know, weather situations that squat over a region, and we have precipitation that is heavy monsoonal? You know, we have to adapt our cities.
I mean, presumably, I mean, if you go to, say, Singapore, they had these huge monsoon drains. So will we have to, perhaps in Central Europe, start having to build these massive drains for heavy rainfall? I suppose I'm still pushing at, there is quite a lot we can do. Are we doing enough to adapt our cities?
No, is the short answer. We're not doing enough to adapt our cities at all. We should be doing much more, and we will have to everywhere on Earth. There is nowhere on Earth that will be untouched by the negative impacts of climate change. Everywhere will feel it. Some places are better able to adapt than others, and Vienna is happily in that situation. Vienna is already this wonderfully livable city, and part of that is down to the way that the buildings are designed, in that it's fairly dense housing with, you know, it's not that the kind of suburban one-story sprawl that is so popular in the United States. We have it's integrated. There aren't, you know, residential zones followed by. Sorry, could you? I'm struggling a little bit with my
having mic problems.
Yeah, I think the problem is I took my jacket off like really stupidly in the wrong.
Or do you want to take your jacket off? Finish
Yeah,
taking your jacket. Yes.
I didn't realise I was
Sort the
clipped.
wardrobe out first. Very important.
Okay, perfect, brilliant. Is that okay? Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, so we will have to adapt everywhere. We can't have these buildings that passively accept energy. You know, we can't have. Think about the climate that we have at the moment. We've inherited it from, you know, 100, sometimes 200 years ago, when the major source of energy was actually used in heating buildings, keeping warm. We're going to be moving much more to keeping cool, right? So cooling is going to be very important. We want our buildings to generate energy. We want our streets to absorb these heavy downpours, but also to store the water for periods of drought that we will experience. We want much greater cycling.
We've got the technology. We know how to do it. So what we're talking about now is so we can adapt a city like Vienna to much higher temperatures, but we need the political will. I mean, this is something that really perplexes me really about human beings. Is we know all these facts about climate change. We've known them for a very, very long time. It's like it's not new really, and yet our leaders, our politicians and so on are very, very reluctant actually to speak the truth about what we face. Why is that? I mean, this is a very big question, because there are solutions out there. We know there are.
Absolutely. And I think there's been a timidity generally to confront this, to be honest, and therefore pragmatic. We are living in the post-climate change world. So we do need to adapt. We need to be honest about what the city will look like, and so what we need to do. We also need to be honest about this is a nation that is like many other nations in Northern Europe, with an aging population. We're not having enough babies to support the younger generation. That's a massive tax imbalance coming. But also, you know, who is going to be doing your personal care when you're older? Who is going to be, you know, when you're living a lot longer but with multiple morbidities, perhaps dementia, you know, disabilities? Who's going to be doing that? Who's going to be, we already have shortages in all aspects of the labour supply. So there is an honesty about climate change, but there also isn't honesty about, if you look at where we are now, there is very much this narrative that, you know, we can decarbonise, we can act on that, but, you know, we have choices. We could do it slowly. We are moving to a post-combustion world. This idea of burning for energy, it's gone. We are moving to electrification. It's not a shall we, can we. It's going to happen. It's going to happen for many reasons. Climate change is pushing it, but the market is also pushing it. It's much, much cheaper now to use renewables. It is happening. And I haven't heard that honesty from leaders either, that this is already underway. And so we now need to rethink how we do everything for this new energetic landscape. It changes everything, because that is the underpinning of our economies, of our industry, of the way we live, of our house, as well as our industry. So when we hear politicians making deals with farmers about you know, their subsidies and how we might, there isn't the honesty and the pragmatism that says, you know, that world is over now. We are moving to this. These are the reasons why. This is how we can get there. These are the paths we can choose. These are the true choices, right? The ones that you're being offered by populist leaders, it's bullshit, okay? It's not true. These are not true. It's not based on reality. And, you know, there's no comeback on that.
I mean, you know, rightly point out that population, ironically, is growing fastest in areas which are most likely to become uninhabitable, so that equatorial zone. In contrast, we here in the global north have a demographic crisis in the opposite direction. We have too many old people and not enough young people being born to pay my pension or care for somebody my age in the future. So, you know, nations like Austria, Germany, UK, France, we need immigration. We have to create pathways, you write, for dignified and safe migration. And obviously it is the job of politicians to reassure us, not to stoke fears like the populists. Okay, you know, and you do some blue sky thinking in this book. In an ideal world, where we were all sensible and we didn't have lots of crazy populists running around winning elections, how would you do it? How can the human race plan for this upheaval, this population transfer for south to north in an ideal world? Let's hold that up as a bit of optimism now. How can we do it? We have kids in this audience. I want to give them an optimistic picture.
Okay, I mean, Kirsty, you've been to many of these places in the global south. You've seen that potential, right, of young entrepreneurial people that, you know, they are being stymied, they are being frustrated by poverty and lack of opportunity, and how much they could bring to our societies. And we see that now. Our societies are utterly, you know, the foundations of our logistics, our hospitality, healthcare, all of these systems are based. I went to a restaurant last night. The waiters are all from other countries. They're all foreigners. We're utterly dependent on foreign workers. Now, again, we need honesty. This migration is happening. We don't know the numbers, and they're not set, and they depend on very many different factors. You know, how much we help people to stay where they are through assisting with adaptation, through helping with climate finance, so it's much cheaper for them to invest in alternatives, and you know, and how we manage this. But it is inevitable that people will move. People always have moved, and that migration is already underway. It's underway in the natural world. We're already seeing fish, insects, butterflies, birds. Even the tree line is moving north. We're seeing diseases from leishmaniasis to dengue, all moving into Europe now. That migration is very much underway. We need to reset the narrative around migration to stop demonizing it. It's completely normal, completely natural. People move to where the work is, right? They're not going to move to some small hick town that never sees a foreigner because there's no work there. And they are moving to where the work is, and the work is there because they need workers. Ergo, like, it pretty much...
Actually, I mean, this is an interesting... I just want to spool back a bit to your point about human beings have always moved, because part of the populist narrative is that migration is a new thing. It's a new phenomena. We all used to live in countries where we were homogenous in the populist narrative. I mean, one of the extraordinary things about Donald Trump is he even managed to make people believe that America was not somehow a nation made up entirely of migrants, you know. But this is, I mean, human beings...
Donald Trump himself, of course, being a product of...
Yes,
very recent.
Sadly, from Scotland, where my people come from. But anyway, terrible. And I thought we had a great gene pool. Yeah, but seriously, this is an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, human beings going right back in our history to when we were hunter-gatherers, we've always moved. I mean, borders are very new, aren't they? The nation state is very new in human history.
Absolutely. And when borders came in, they were not to keep people out. They were very much to keep people in. Right? Because leaders wanted to keep people in, so and they went on sorties to bring more people in, either through coercion or persuading them in various ways, because they needed people in the military, in agriculture, in industry, and so on. I mean, it's essential. They understood that general productivity rule, which economists, of course, understand today. I mean, it's not a big secret. It's completely normal. It's very recent. You know, that borders have actually been seen as something, you know, we almost moved to a completely borderless world at the beginning of the 20th century. If it hadn't been for the world wars and this fear of things like spies and so on, we would have we would have been pretty much a borderless world. And, one of the most beautiful things, I think, about the European Union is this creation of a world where all different nationalities, languages, cultures, and everything are celebrated, and yet people can move freely. And it breaks my heart to see that being broken up, by centrist leaders who are scared and of challenging the populists in their. I'm thinking of Germany, right? It's not got. The AFD is not, the Chancellor is not from the AFD, and yet we're seeing that deliberate erosion. The AFD's principles are being won by, and it's very, very frightening. And I know that you have elections coming up, and I would say that Brexit has been incredibly damaging to Britain.
But let's go back to the topics in hand, because one of the things you're arguing in your book is actually that. That cities are actually, pretty successful, and they are how we will survive the future. And these will be mega cities, and they'll be made up of many different nationalities. So just, explain that, because you actually have this vision of the future whereby there will be these big new mega cities in places like northern Canada, in Siberia, in in Scotland, places in the north where it's cooler. So how will these cities be different than the cities that we live in now? What will those, and again, I want you to do the blue sky thinking and the optimism. What are those ideal cities going to be look like, and how will they be sustainable? How will we feed people? How will we have the energy? How will they work?
Yeah, so change is scary, and this sounds very frightening because it's different from what we have now. But I would ask you, first of all, to think about the world that we live in now, with deep inequalities, expensive energy prices, food shocks and insecurities, polluted air, polluted waterways. We can do so much better, and we can do so much better if we plan. And so it is possible. We can create a vision of a cleaner, greener, fairer world in which we build cities that are truly inclusive, that regard our shared humanity as equally valid, where we are all citizens of this place, where the buildings generate their own energy, where they are denser, yes, they're dense cities, but they're also greener, where a lot of thought has gone into the circularity that is visible everywhere in nature, but in materials, in buildings that respond to different temperatures and cool the inhabitants, where the products we make break down naturally and are easily recycled into various other things, where food can be generated and grown in different places, even with this new climate. So, it does mean some basics, which I know in Austria, meat is a large part of the diet. Meat is also, responsible for 98% of the deforestation on the planet. Meat cannot be consumed by 8, 9, possibly 10 billion population in the same degree as it is today. We will be moving to alternatives. It may be meat grown in labs, but it's more likely to be generated by microbes or plant-based in some way. But it will be more nutritious. It will have more benefits for us and our planet. In terms of the water, we will be able to generate water where it's needed, even out of the atmosphere. We're talking about a huge energy revolution, which we're already right in the middle of. It's really hard to see because
and these will be 15-minute cities, actually. Where
yes, very walkable.
We walk everywhere.
Very walkable. I think. If we look at models today, if we look at the Tokyo metropolis, like this huge megapolis, I guess, of Tokyo, which is really grand, it's actually based around small neighborhood cities within the greater city that are all very walkable, and that is a model that it's it works around us. We are not going to change the dimensions of our body and the needs we have socially and psychologically. That will be the same. And so we build the cities for us rather than to be grand to show off to other dignitaries or
So in this brave new world that you're imagining, what happens to the nation state? Do we still have to have the nation state?
Well, you know, this is a huge upheaval, and it has to be done pretty quickly. So I don't see an erosion of the nation state right now, because I think we need to concentrate really on the energy transition and all the other things that we need to do. But I think the nation state will have to change, because we are going to have to see a much greater working together of people. These crises we face are, you know, they're existential in scale. The climate crisis is not something that just affects, you know, Austria and stops at the border. Like, the floods don't just stop where at the border. They don't care about our invented kind of lines on a map. So we need to work together. We need to work together, you know, city mayor to city mayor, but also state to state bilaterally, regionally, and globally. These are global systems. We have to start thinking much more along planetary lines. And I think that needs new systems, new tools of governance, actually, planetary governance. And I'm not talking about some sort of like Star Wars style thing. I'm talking about the kind of cooperative idea that brings together things like the WHO or the IPCC, where we get these kind of round table looks at our world as a whole and the problems as something that nations act together cooperatively to solve, because there isn't an alternative to this. We have to. Yeah,
because I mean, I know that. I mean, that's kind of wonderful, and I know everybody in this room is probably sitting there going, "We're actually living in an era where we have the entire post-war order has broken down, where there is less cooperation now than there has been in my entire lifetime." So
Kirsty,
this is quite depressing.
Let me take you back to, you know, it does feel unimaginable. We are in a bit of a nadir. I mean, I would say it's not quite, I think we're already on the up. We are seeing this kind of surge of right-wing populist movement, but we have lost Bolsonaro. We have lost, I hope, Trump. Oh, God. You know, think back to the end of World War II, when the world was in chaos. Entire nations hated each other so much, you know, entire cities were razed to the ground. There was migration on an absolutely phenomenal scale. There was hunger. There was, you know, huge numbers of death. There had been a Holocaust. I mean, it was a completely desperate, awful world. And yet, in that time, nations, leaders who had been, you know, who hated each other so much they were trying to eliminate the entire nation, came together and created a Declaration of Human Rights, a united nation. They came together and said, we're going to eradicate humanitarian diseases, humanities diseases like polio, smallpox, you know.
So we can do it. History shows that human beings can create
remarkable change can happen in a very short space of time. It just takes the vision to do it. Our social systems also require tipping points, but we can create those tipping points ourselves.
I want to go back to the point about migration and how politicians are very... I mean, it's very, very difficult to find a politician these days who's prepared to speak in favour of migration. I mean, you know, basically since Angela Merkel, I can hardly think of anybody who, you know, on the left or the right. But you give quite an interesting example in your book about Anchorage, Alaska, and the mayor there, who has a new set of migration policies. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's a pragmatic response, okay? when a nation wants to build itself up, and Canada has been following this as well, actually, that, you know, Canada is planning to treble its population over the coming decades. Okay, so the Canadians that live there now will be in a minority compared to how many people will be there. And yes, there has been resistance, and there has been, you know, there have been some problems with that. But the majority of people understand that if they want a bigger, more productive, economically, you know, positive Canada, they will need more people, more citizens. And the same with Alaska. So they have various ways to understand that migrants, you know, to have migrants choosing your city, finding it attractive, we will be competing over immigrants soon, right, in the coming decades. You know, are they going to go to Austria? Are they going to go to Berlin? Are they going to go to London? Where are they going to go? There will be competition. So this weird time that we're in, with this very toxic narrative that everybody is coalesced around, will seem very strange. And the more that you can offer these migrants in terms of, you know, German classes, help with integration, help with understanding how the health system works, getting housing, you know, opportunities to progress, the more you will benefit from that, all of you as citizens. And that's what Alaska's mayor has realized, right? So they have many programs in place. They understand that many people will come from places of trauma, like Somalia or Syria. And they have psychological, therapeutic processes in place, but they're also, you know, they're encouraging people to settle in integrated housing. And it's this, you know, we will have to change this idea of what it means to be a citizen of a country, that it's not based on whether you have blonde hair and blue eyes or whatever, white skin, or, you know, worship a particular church. It's based on something, you know, more about this collective idea of building a city that is, has potential and opportunity and compassion and cooperative ideas.
In a way, that those identities already exist, don't they? I mean, if you think about I mean, I'm a Londoner. I do actually really identify as a Londoner. I'm in a city where 1 in 2 of members of the population are born overseas. It's probably one of the most multicultural cities on earth, and is much better for it than when I first, you know, arrived in London as a student in the 80s. It's a much better city because it's so multicultural. So I definitely, and I think a lot of New Yorkers, if you talk to New Yorkers, they will say, or Parisians or whatever. I mean, we already have those city identities. I identify more with being a Londoner than I do with being English, which is not an identity that I particularly like. I like the idea of being a Londoner. I like the idea of being a European. Those are my identities more than actually the nation state. So, and I don't think I'm alone in that. So I think we're already kind of there on that. Now I'm going to open up to questions in a minute, but there's one more thing I wanted to bring up from your book, which is the question of economic growth. We still live in an era, we've just got a new government in the UK, where governments talk about this being absolutely the aim of all governments is to increase economic growth. You argue that we cannot continue to pursue economic growth if we want to save the planet. We have to rethink our attitude to growth. How do we do that?
I don't say that we can't pursue economic growth. I absolutely think we should, especially while we have poverty. It's a different kind of growth. But we cannot measure it in the metrics of GDP as it is currently being measured. Absolutely. We must decouple economic growth from environmental and social destruction, whether it's, you know, children in the Congo mining minerals for us, or whether it's destruction of forests. We have to decouple that. Now, in terms of carbon emissions, the good news is that many countries have already decoupled economic growth from carbon emissions, and that's brilliant. They are the wealthiest countries. We need to help other countries that are poorer to also make that leap. we need to see economic growth, and this isn't some sort of niche realization from me. I think the majority of economists also, and leaders, don't see GDP as a valid marker of economic growth at all. It does need to be changed, and there are several different metrics to use now. But growth, really, we need to understand that it is an increase in productivity or quality of production. So, for example, a new malaria vaccine is an increase in economic growth because it enhances people's lives. And we need to understand that we do need growth in order to lift people out of poverty, in order to keep our societies flourishing, but it has to be of a different kind. I don't see us...
So give us just some specific examples, like, I mean, clothes. Let's just be really basic about this. And we probably all go out and buy way too many clothes, don't we? New clothes.
Yeah, so...
then just end up in landfills and,
Yeah, well, I mean, that is true. And there's
that's a big indication of kind of, our high streets, shopping, blah, blah. We see that as an example of success in our current economies, don't we? People going out shopping, spending a lot of money on buying new things. That will have to stop.
But there needs to be thought in how that, we need to think right from the beginning of when we design or create a product, whatever that product is, whether it's clothing or whatever it is, about the end of life of that product. How is that going to be reached? I mean, there is this kind of obscene need, which I don't totally understand, and I think it's a sort of psychological sign of distress of people sort of buying constantly new. There's some crazy amount that young women are buying clothes, every week, ridiculously, and just throwing them away. I mean, I don't know what that is. That's a sort of sickness. But in terms of how many...
It's because we can. Well, that's the point. It's not a sickness, it's a desire. If it's out there and you're young and you're a 15-year-old girl and you want to buy something new, why not? I mean,
how many times can you wear?
Yes.
I don't know. Yeah.
No, but you can't blame the kid, is what I'm saying. Anyway, we're going to open up to
the point is, if you are doing that, but in the creation of those clothes and in the afterlife of those clothes, there is not pollution to the environment, and it is not destroying the natural world in some way, then I don't see a problem with it. But unfortunately, at the moment, the clothing industry is very much not in that situation. It's incredibly polluting and very toxic. So we need to get there, and then it's not a problem.
Okay, and we've got a roving mic. Let's take some questions from the audience. Yeah, we've got one back here.
Hi, Clara Benedict, former fellow of the IWM. My question would be, so basically we now really live in a time, as you also said, where we are losing people, houses, recently in Austria, quite a bit of them, species, glaciers, you name it. And still, as a society, we seem to be accepting this now, right? It's like that now. It's not like people stand up and say, okay, now we really need to change things. And there's also a recent study from Yale that shows that 2/3 of the population rarely or never discusses the climate crisis. So I would be interested in hearing why you think that is. Thanks.
Yeah, well, there are many reasons for this. I think one of the reasons is that there has been, climate change is something we can't see the carbon molecules in the atmosphere. They're invisible. In the way that you can see pollution in a river when it turns orange or green. So we can't see it. So when we're attributing the blame, it's not an immediate, culprit. So there is that disconnect. There's also the shifting baselines idea, where these extreme events become normal. We're starting to understand this is what the weather is like, and that's true. That is what the weather is like.
Because we just adapt.
Yeah, well, we're not adapting though. We're just accepting that that's what it is like now. But there are certain industries that take this a lot more seriously because they have to, and one of them is the insurance industry, right? And so what is starting to happen, it's happening very slowly in Europe, but it's happened already in the US where they've experienced more of this, is, for example, home insurers and property insurers have pretty much pulled out of the entire state of Florida, large parts of California. It's very difficult to insure your property there. And in some places, the state underwrites it. Federal, New Orleans, you can't get property insurance there. The state is underwriting it. But for how long will they be doing that, right? At some point, it's going to become too expensive. So we need to be having those questions, those discussions right now. And that is also going to happen in Europe. And we're going to start seeing, as is already the case in the US, and also if we look globally, this kind of climate apartheid where the wealthy people are able to move to safer areas and protect themselves through various adaptation methods. And the poorer people are literally stuck in houses that are uninsurable, unsellable, without being able to afford to move to safer places. We are going to have to discuss, what about the people who are living in at-risk flood zones in Austria? When they move, how much is the government going to help them in terms of compensation to buy like-for-like houses elsewhere? I thought it was very interesting, actually, that the Icelandic government stepped in when the recent volcanic eruption, the lava, made villages unlivable. People had to move. And stepped in to provide new houses that were the same, appropriate. They saw it as their responsibility to do that. Now, Iceland is a tiny, tiny population of fairly wealthy state, and it can afford to do that, and everyone can see the volcano, and they can see the lava, and it's a very viscerally obvious thing. Austria has also got a small population, but I would say it would be very difficult for the government to be able to fund like for like for people to move. When we're talking about bigger nations, bigger states like Germany, when we're talking about bigger entire countries where a third is going to be, it's pretty much already becoming unlivable for parts of the year, like Bangladesh, we need to be having those conversations right now about how we're going to deal with this movement, this migration, which is going to be happening already within nations.
Now a question there. Lucrezia.
Thank you. Thank you for the great talk. I'm a climate scientist myself, and I see one of the main problems, it's when I meet green ideologists. Yeah, so from the Green Party, for instance, because the climate policies are so obsolete by now. And as you say, we moved beyond, yeah? And if nobody, the politician is one problem, but the climate activist, it's a huge problem as well, because they are just as uninformed as the politician. And unfortunately, if nobody says to them that we cannot just mitigate, we have to adapt now. And as you say, we have to adapt much, much faster. We need the climate activists to be well informed, to have policies from today, and to go for green shading, and they just hammer down the CO2 reduction, which is of course necessary, but we need to do much more green shading nowadays, yeah, for temperature, for health issues in the cities. I mean, there's so many other things, but I'm just saying, climate activists are a huge part of the problem as well.
Yeah, there have been a lot of. I'm not sure what I'm not sure the details of the Green Party in Austria, but I do know that there have been quite a lot of issues with the Green Party in the UK.
Well, there's a lot of we're all going to go back to the land and grow our own vegetables, which is not really very sustainable, is it? I mean, there's too many of us on the planet.
Well, it's unappealing and also completely impractical, yeah.
Let's take a couple more questions. Yeah, one at the back.
I agree. We all need to be a lot better informed, and adaptation has been necessary for some time now. And it needs much more financing. We need pragmatism, and that starts with honesty from our leaders, absolute honesty about what we are experiencing already and what we will expect to experience. You know, this isn't something that might happen in the future. This is something that's already happening right today.
On the subject, hi, Julie Klinger, a geographer. I don't know if this is on.
We can hear you.
Yeah. Oh, you can hear me, great. So on the subject,
But hold the microphone to your mouth.
on the subject of pragmatism, I love the vision of the future cities. I love the blue sky thinking. And so this is a question about how we get from here to there. I'd like to hear you talk about how, say, the military might be repurposed to facilitate the kinds of transitions that you're talking about. Thank you.
And actually, while we're at it, can we just take another question here? Just take 2 questions at once, because we're running out of time, and I want to make sure they
First of all, forgive me, I arrived a little bit late, so forgive me if my comments or questions have already been discussed at the beginning. One thing interesting to me is how do we deal with conflicting interests, different groups, for example, environmental issues, in other words, keeping the landscape free from buildings, and then we get, of course, the industrial people who come and want to build large buildings there. It's one thing. Then we have a lot of wild animals coming back. Great, okay, we're told that wolves are kind of the keepers of the woods and the forests, but the farmers are up in arms, of course, because they're killing the sheep. So just 2 things, and then our freedom to travel versus over-tourism. So how do we deal with these conflicting interest groups? Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with Julie's question about how do we get there with these new mega cities in Canada or whatever, and the interesting point about, you know, for instance, would we repurpose the military to help us do that?
Yeah, I mean, the military is a huge resource that will need to be used. I mean, I think it's quite interesting. I was speaking at an event for the European Civil Protection Forum, which, you know, in which the European nations, they're all a part of this, and they, you know, when there is a natural disaster, people collaborate over these things, you know, like, I don't know, a flooding in Bavaria, people from France, you know, the military from France might be sent in also to help with that, and from Switzerland or whatever to help the Germans with the you know, disaster. But what we're seeing right now is going to be multiple disasters affecting multiple nations that are much more severe, and will they have the capacity to deal with it? So, you know, we will need a much greater civil protection forum, civil protection force, essentially, that deals with this and can also deal when there are no disasters in those periods with things like rewilding and so on. And this is a huge need, again, for labour on the ground. This isn't something AI can do, right? So we need to rethink the way we interact socially, politically, and with the kinds of upheaval that we are facing, and that is an upheaval in terms of the climate, in terms of disasters, in terms of building entire new cities. Yes, we will need a labour force for that, and there are these organised systems already in place of you know, trained, physically fit young people in the military, which could be repurposed for that, and I think it's a much better use of their time than killing each other. But on the other hand, you know, if Russia invades a NATO country, you know, is there going to be enough force, you know, to help Latvia deal with that while they're also got flooding in the Rhine? I mean, you know.
So let's go, because there's more hands going up. We've only got about 5 minutes left, but very quickly on the conflicting interests. On
the conflicting interests, well, that's politics, right? That's what politics is supposed to be there to solve. There will be winners and losers as we transition. We have to be pragmatic. I would say that, for example, a lot of the NIMBYism, I'm calling it, do you know, not in my backyard idea of things like new pylons being constructed, new housing projects. you know, these are valid concerns that society, portions of society have, but on the other hand, we also have a need to electrify everything. And that's what we, as concerned democratic societies, need to together collectively decide. What is our priority? Is it going to be affordable housing, cheap, abundant electricity to help us deal with the crisis we face, you know, or are we going to preserve this idyll of landscape? And in some places we will decide that the landscape is particularly special and important and shouldn't be interrupted, and in other places we will have to go with the pragmatism of the 21st century, which in my opinion is a very urgent need to deal with that. And that's what politics is. It's discussing ways of dealing with it, and it should not be about burying our heads in the sand and saying, you know, we can ignore this, it's not of concern. And I think far too much of politics has been to the latter.
I'm going to take a quick round of questions. One there with the man with the microphone, but very quickly because I'm running out of time.
Yeah, so you mentioned that we need a better way to measure economic growth than GDP. Do you have a particularly favorite index on whether to do that?
There are so many, and they all have their pros and cons. I can't remember which the most popular one is at the moment, but they're all better. Basically, GDP is one of the worst and was accidentally chosen. And I don't think it was, even when it originated, it wasn't intended to be used as it is today. It is very, very poor, and governments recognise that as well. This isn't this big. I think it's kind of been built up as this big form of protest. It's not something that governments kind of are. You know, they're wedded to this idea at all, and they do use other metrics already.
Just a final question from Misha at the back, and then that's it.
Yeah, I'm actually making an announcement. Misha Glenning, I'm the rector of the IWM and one of the co-organisers here. Gaia has made a series of really important points very well, and we've scheduled another talk tomorrow, not with Gaia, but with Niels Gilman, who has written a book called Children of a Modest Star, in which he addresses quite concretely how you politically, how you transition from the sort of chaos of global politics today into a politics that can actually address these issues coherently. And so I just wanted to alert everyone to that, because it complements what Gaia's been saying absolutely fantastically, and it's going to be a really good talk as well.
Thank you, Misha. I'm going to go to this talk, but I would also say that there is a lot more detail about all of this in my own book.
And I think on that note, Gaia will be signing books outside. Thank you so much for all coming. I'm sorry I couldn't come to all of your questions, but what a great discussion. Thank you, Gaia.
Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you.